This is the Magnavox Odyssey 2 video game console, and only on Classic Game Room will you find a review comparing the Magnavox versus the Sega Dreamcast. And here we get to my first point. The Magnavox came with a built-in keyboard. The Dreamcast required a keyboard add-on that plugged into one of the ports. Point for Magnavox. The Magnavox Odyssey 2 was released in 1978 in the United States, and there were about 2 million of these units sold in its lifespan. The Sega Dreamcast was released in 1999 in the United States, and about 10 million Sega Dreamcasts were sold until its discontinuation in 2001. Now, to put this in perspective, there were about 30 million Atari 2600s sold in its lifetime. Now that's a sandwich, a slice of Sega Dreamcast in between a Magnavox Odyssey 2 and an Atari 2600. You put some mayonnaise on that, you're good to go. Now you might think that Classic Game Room has just gone crazy again. How can you compare a Magnavox Odyssey 2 to a Dreamcast? Well, the fact is, Classic Game Room has remained crazy for quite some time. Both of these game systems couldn't be more different, but at the same time, they're very similar. As good as they both might be, they are complete commercial disasters. When the Sega Dreamcast was released in 1999, its primary competitor was the Sony PlayStation 1, and the Dreamcast was far more powerful and had a great collection of titles early on like Soul Calibur and Hydro Thunder. When the Magnavox Odyssey 2 was released in 1978, its primary competitor was the Atari 2600. And the Magnavox in many ways has superior graphics and some superior capabilities. The Odyssey 2 and the Dreamcast are also both similar in that they are legacy systems. The Magnavox Odyssey 1, which I sadly do not have, was released in 1972, a very, very early game system. And Sega had the Sega Master System, Sega Genesis, Sega Saturn, and a number of arcade titles. They're also similar in that Magnavox and Sega had their proprietary titles and characters. For instance, Sega had, and still has, Sonic the Hedgehog, and came out with games like Sonic Adventure 2. In contrast, the Magnavox Odyssey 2 had KC Munchkin. Comparing KC Munchkin to Sonic the Hedgehog might seem a bit amusing today, but the fact is these were both titles exclusive to the consoles. And you could program your own maps in KC Munchkin, things that the Atari 2600 couldn't possibly achieve. You can certainly say that Sonic the Hedgehog has enjoyed a longer life than KC Munchkin. However, KC did make a return appearance in KC's Krazy Chase, spelled with a K, on the Magnavox Odyssey 2 after this game was pulled from the market for being too similar to Pac-Man, which is somewhat debatable. Another thing that the Magnavox and Sega had in common is that neither game system had a version of Thexter, which is complete bullshit. This game should have been on every game console known to man. And they need to remake this at once. And if you look closely, Thexter himself was an Odyssey 2 fan, because it says O2 right there. Maybe he was hoping that somebody would notice and port this game onto the Odyssey 2. Fist clenched, ready to kick some ass. Now, one major difference here is that the Dreamcast plays discs, and you insert them into the optical media drive here, which works nicely, feels solid. The Magnavox Odyssey 2 plays cartridges, and you know I like cartridges. And you insert them into there, and it also feels nice and solid. They give you a great handle that you can pull the cartridge out with. What really matters with any video game console is the games on that system, and here's where we start to see some differences. You wouldn't know it from this shot, but the Sega Dreamcast had far more games than the Magnavox Odyssey 2. Sadly, for Magnavox, not as many third-party developers were willing to develop games for the Odyssey 2. Instead, they all developed games for Atari and maybe ColecoVision and some of the other competitors back in the day. The Dreamcast has a ton of titles. The good news is that both game consoles had some excellent video games that are a lot of fun to play today, as well as a number of titles that didn't really stand out. And if you're looking to collect Magnavox Odyssey 2 or Sega Dreamcast games, most of them are affordable today, and that'll help you out when starting your collection. Another good thing that the Magnavox and Dreamcast have in common is a wide variety of games, like cool little quirky puzzle games like Choo Choo Rocket, which is one of the best games on the Dreamcast, driving games like Sega Rally 2. On the Odyssey 2, we have a driving game in the form of Speedway and Spin Out and War of Nerves. And I still like that thing attacking the guy with tentacles. I'm going to give that thing a name. I'm going to call him Simeon the Tentacle Droid. That's one thing the Dreamcast doesn't have. The Dreamcast does not have Simeon the Tentacle Droid. Help me. Now, since this is a competition, there should be a winner. Will it be the Magnavox Odyssey 2 or the Sega Dreamcast? Usually these come out a dead tie, because the fact is you really should own both game consoles because they're so completely different. You know, they're like practically 20 years apart. But you know, I think I'm going to have to break tradition. I think that I'm going to give the edge to the Sega Dreamcast. I don't mean to break the hearts of all the Odyssey 2 fans out there, but the fact is the Dreamcast has a lot more games. And for that reason, I picked the Dreamcast. Now, they're both excellent game consoles, but if you had to pick one or the other, you'd be happy with this one. The Odyssey 2 and the Dreamcast both got the short end of the stick. They're excellent game consoles for their era. The Odyssey 2 simply could not compete with the thundering marketing force of Atari, and the Dreamcast got obliterated by the PlayStation 2 and Sony's enormous marketing machine. They're underappreciated game consoles. They had a lot of competitors back in the day, but you know what? That makes them great collector's items today because they really don't cost that much. In fact, the Dreamcast and the Odyssey 2 cost about the same amount of money today. And there you have it. You certainly should consider both of these game systems, but I have a solution that should make everybody happy. Let's take War of Nerves here with our new friend, and open that up. There we go. The Sega Dreamcast 02. We would just simply refer to it as the DC-02. That works. Oh, I'm putting it in backwards. That was dumb. Okay.